All right. Well, all right. Sorry about the logistical challenges there. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining the 2022 Digital Services Coalition Educational Webinar. It's good to see everyone. My name is Ken Fang. I'm the president of Mobomo and co-chair of the DSC Education Committee with my partner in crime, who I hope is joining. but
I'm here, finally, I'm here.
Sorry about that. That was my issue, logistical issues there or whatever. John Foster from Fearless, who's going to be moderating our webinar today. So looking forward to a great program this year. Our April lineup will focus on customer experience, obviously a hot topic with the new executive order, and focus on customer experience in federal financial regulators, something that you don't think of a whole lot. So thanks to Ben Morris from Pluribus Digital for helping coordinate that panel. That'll include folks from OCC, FDIC, and CFPP. So keep a lookout for that coming up in April. For folks that are not familiar with the Digital Services Coalition, DSC is a collection. Actually, am I still sharing? Yeah, okay. DSC is the Digital Services Coalition, a collection of agile technology and design firms that serve the government. Our mission is to be the trusted partners of government by providing technical knowledge and thought leadership necessary to continuously mature the delivery of digital services that are accessible, functional, and work seamlessly to support the full range of customer experiences. You can find out more information on the website, digitalservicescoalition.org, which I'll also paste into the chat for everyone to see. So before we get started, a couple of logistical items. Please note that the webinar is being recorded, so we do plan to make it available to a wider audience. So John, you and Adam are going to have to keep it PG. Please make sure you're on mute during the presentation. You can send any questions you want in the chat, either to everyone or privately to me, Ken Fang, if you want to keep it anonymous. In the chat window, I'll be collecting them for open Q&A session towards the end of the webinar. To promote networking, feel free to go ahead and use the chat window as well to share your contact information and anything that other folks on the call might want to know about your company. So with that, without further ado, it's my pleasure to turn it over to John Foster, the Education Committee Co-Chair and Chief Operating Officer of Fearless. John, all you.
That sounded really formal, Ken. I'm nowhere near that formal in my speaking. Yeah, so you know, some background and you know, setting the picture of landscape a little bit, right? So you know, the DSC has been talking about you know, ways for us to continue to grow exposure, not just of our member companies, but also of you know, other companies in industry. And one area that we thought that would be really intriguing for a conversation was around just working with the military in general, right? And this idea of demystifying or really understanding at the root what you know our military does, you know, for us here in the U.S. And so I had the chance to meet, or first I had a chance to hear from Adam. Good Lord, this is probably like 6-7 years back at an intelligence community summit, right? So it was behind closed doors. And he gave this presentation, and it included Mario Brothers, and it was just great. And it was really about like shipping product, shipping things into production. And you know, been a big fan and follower ever since. And you know, Phyllis and Adam and the folks at the Castle Run have developed a relationship over time. And I thought it'd be a great idea to just bring Adam in to kind of talk about his experiences working at Castle Run, his experience working with the Air Force. And answer any of your questions, right? So what I'm going to do the Ken thing. I'm going to read the formal blurb, Adam, and then I'll turn it over to you, right? So here we go. Adam Furtado, startup founder and former chief of platform for the Kessel Run, a U.S. Air Force digital transformation initiative revolutionizing how the Air Force builds and delivers software. There he led a team of 200 plus active duty military and government civilian disruptors, keyword right there, disruptors, to change the way the DoD does business with the tech prowess of Silicon Valley and a culture all their own. Kessel Run uses lean principles and user-centered focus to continuously deliver value directly to the warfighter on a daily basis. He's still actively involved with digital transformation in the DoD and recently started his own company, which I encourage him to plug here in this space. So, floor is all yours, Adam. I know you have a presentation, then we'll go through the Q&A as well.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. Hello, everybody. My name is Adam Furtado. I'm gonna just share my screen really quickly. Forgive me. There we go. So I did put some kind of thoughts together initially to kind of kick this off, but looking forward to kind of having an open conversation. I really was interested in this discussion when we all chatted a few weeks ago in preparation, because it's something that has come up quite a bit, to be honest. And I wanted to have a real open conversation around what it means to work in and with the military, particularly for digital services companies who may have certain kind of feelings about that. I'd love the opportunity to kind of open up that discussion and see if we can help with that, some of that initial demystifying, if you will. But first, a little bit about me. I'm an Air Force veteran. I joined the Air Force a month out of high school. It was a long time ago, and have spent my entire career up until about a year ago in and around the Air Force and the military. I would say that I sit right in the overlap of the Venn diagram between product development and digital services in the Air Force and the DoD. So I try to do what I can to kind of bridge between both of those communities in however I can. In the last, number 4 or 5 years, particularly working with Kessel Run, I've worked with a number of DSC companies as a client and then later as a consultant. And I've always been so impressed with the people, the values, the teams. It's clear that you all do a really nice job of making sure that the companies who are included in this coalition share values and principles in what you're all here to do. That's make the government a better place and more effective at what it needs to do. I think it's a huge value to the government. So the team asked me to come here and kind of introduce a conversation around working with the Air Force. Really, it's largely the DoD, the military, and hoping to introduce some new ideas and allow people to consider the DoD as a potential client and customer base, because they really need it. And then they need your talents and expertise in particular, and we'll talk a little bit about that. I would say that I have a passion for this work, but I also share a pragmatic view of the current state of things, and I'll share some of that. So that'll be centered around kind of a digital perspective and software and digital transformation as we go forward. So I'm sure everybody's kind of heard this term before, it's good enough for government work, right? Well, historically, it never was really a sarcastic or a cynical remark. During World War II, when we all in the United States kind of rallied around this kind of shared idea and ideal around supporting liberation, the US government became known for its manufacturing prowess and its production ability. So at the time, you would hear this term a lot, good enough for government work, but it was companies actually asking themselves, is this good enough for government work? Are we sure we're doing a good enough job here that it would pass, the rigor and the quality gates and that sort of thing? Obviously that's changed over time. The last, 4 decades or so, the DoD in particular, but the government has grown into the world's largest bureaucracy, right? Just layers and layers on top of itself of added communicational boundaries and policies and memos. We see it today still too, right? We're trying to solve every problem by a new memo. And then over time, if you take a zoomed out approach of that, all those things come together in a really complex and slow place to work, leading us to the place we are today. And this couldn't be any more obvious or true than when you look at software in particular within government. So if you look at the current state of government and DoD software, and all these statistics are from the last 3.5 years, 94% of government IT projects overall are behind schedule over budget. Within the DoD itself, 75% of all DoD IT spending is on O&M or sustainment, and that's for software. So in a world that we're trying to move to DevOps and continuous delivery and constant improvement of our software, 3/4 of our funding has gone towards keeping the old stuff available, even though we know that that old stuff is something that needs to be replaced. So it's kind of a tough place to be. 40% of those IT projects never deliver a single thing, complete waste, due for a bunch of factors. And this one is hard to read. $2.8 trillion spent on bad software by the government in 2018. How you calculate that is something to consider, but this would be 10% of our GDP here. And this study was pretty fascinating. I can share the link if anybody's interested. On the right here, Eric Schmidt, former Google Alphabet CEO, testified in front of Congress on this very fact.
Just to make a strong statement, the DoD violates pretty much every rule in modern product development.
And I think we would share this in all of government, right? All of you who work with various government agencies, we see this all the time. There's a lot of work to be done. And I think a lot of this stuff that happens in the DoD, while definitely bears resemblance in other agencies, I think it's exacerbated significantly within the defense industry for a bunch of reasons, mostly around human incentives. So in being in this space for a long time, I've resigned myself to the fact that 90% of our challenges tie back to flawed personal incentives of humans. And I think government workers are in a really difficult position. It's easy to blame them, but I think the incentive structures that they live within are actually the real challenge that we have. And I think the key to that is that government workers confuse activity with value creation often. And so I like to think of the government as this large, massive machine, right? So imagine you have this massive machine, you can't see the top of it or the ends of it. All you can see is you're placed in front of a specific gear or a button, and your job is to make sure that that gear continues to turn. That's it. You've never been given any other guidance of like why the gear turns or what happens if the gear stops turning. We also don't really know what value is coming out of the machine on the other end. We can't see it. We don't want to leave to go look because our job is to turn the gear that's right in front of us. And this is what we do. Government workers are incentivized to conduct activities that slowly turn that gear continuously going on, right? So we go to our staff meetings and we report our updates. We have our Gantt charts and our POAMs, and all of it is not really centered around value creation because the incentives don't really tell us to do that. It's more about activity creation to keep the gears moving, non-valuable activity that turns the gears of the machine. So people just kind of assume, right? If my job is to turn the gear, if I need to trust that at the end of this machine, value is being created somewhere. I'm just going to trust that going in. But that's actually not the case most of the time. That's nowhere more prevalent than within the DoD. And there's a lot of factors in place there, including the DoD is built on a structure where leaders come into new environments. They're there for short periods of time, and then they purposely get moved somewhere else. It's impossible to build enough context and empathy and the things needed to be a successful digital leader in the short amount of time that people spend there. Not to mention the fact that we aren't prepared yet to have digital leaders at the higher levels of government and military. So all of these things kind of tie together with your normal bureaucratic struggles to lead us to be in a really poor state from a digital perspective within the DoD. Another great testimony, if you haven't read it, Adam Grant, author, he's a organizational psychologist at Wharton. He testified to Congress on this as well. And I would urge everybody to look up the transcript here, the video. It was like really, really good. He basically, it felt like watching it. He took the previous 5 years of my life and kind of distilled it down into a 12-minute stretch. But he said in here that the DoD's culture is a threat to our national security. And I thought that was a really strong and simple way to kind of phrase all the things that we've been talking about is around this struggle here. Whether that's from the size and the change in tolerance, the incentive structures, it leads us to an organization that is not set up or organized to react well to new ideas or changes in approaches very easily at all. So there's an over-reliance on individuals, and then those individuals are incentivized to continue the status quo at all costs. And I go through this kind of early, preamble or whatever to just tell you what I care about. And this is to build a sustainable modern government this is what drives me, and I've taken various approaches to try to get there. And I think this probably drives all of us in different ways in the work that we do, is to build a government that works better for its employees, customers, constituents, in order for all of us to be more effective. And I think we all know the struggles there. And as I've grown in my career and done more things or whatever, I think one of the major differences that always comes to mind is when I compare government with commercial industry. And I think we often fall into this trap of trying to compare our government effort to Spotify models and what Google would do and all of these different things. And I think there's like a major difference that makes that nearly impossible. If you're in the commercial world, you would see a need, build a product for it. If you find that product market fit, you build a company around it, and scale it, try to sell it, and you kind of keep growing from there. In the government world, it's completely opposite. The companies already exist, right, in the form of a program office or some sort of a group of humans that are handed a market segment by somebody on high, usually in the form of paperwork and a memo. Then regardless of their ability to actually deliver effectively, they just own that market segment, usually in perpetuity. There isn't competition that makes them kind of shift out. They just own the market segment, and they are the people who deliver X thing, regardless of the value being delivered. So I think what I've come to is that government organizations building a successful product is irrelevant to me. I think the goal is for government organizations to be able to repeatedly, continuously deliver meaningful, measurable outcomes to their employees, users, constituents in perpetuity, sustainably, forever, particularly in the face of inevitable change and wrongness. We know we're going to be wrong. We know things are going to change. We're seeing it faster and faster now every day. So how do we build government teams that can build the ability to sense and respond to that change and focus on outcomes? And I think that is where the companies on the line here in this organization become really, really important. That's not going to happen on its own organically. It's going to require different voices coming from different angles to connect with individual government employees in the right place, the right time, in order to slowly start affecting change in the way that they think about the way that the world works. One way that we've been able to do that was at Kessel Run. So in 2017, I moved my family to San Francisco on a whim. Started a new project I didn't know much about in building modern software within the DoD. We took a bunch of active duty airmen. So these are people of all ranks in uniform, people who have been in the military their whole careers. We dropped them literally in Silicon Valley in a downtown San Francisco software office that probably looks similar to the ones that you all work in or used to. The culture shock was significant, but almost all in good ways. And in that, we were able to test out and experiment that modern ways of approaching product development, engineering, design, even organizational design and management needed to change, and that they could work within the DoD. It was a bit of an experiment to show that we didn't have to work in kind of old ways because we were used to that. We could challenge some of those assumptions. So that 5-person team over time grew into Kessel Run over the next 3.5 years. And that led to about 1,300 person organization doing, cloud native, software development, building a variety of products, mostly centered around command and control and kind of air warfare. And in that realm, I led both product development and then later platform delivery. And one of the thoughts you should probably have is like 5 to 1,300 in 3 years seems like a lot. It was far too many, and things broke, and we had to fix them and learn new things on the fly. And that was the best part of the job in a lot of ways. The things that work in leading a 5-person team just don't work anymore at 200 even, or 500 or 1,000. And actually it's kind of fascinating that they take the person who was good at leading a 5-person team and just say like, oh, you'll be good at 1,000, it'll be fine. Very different job. And I had to learn that the hard way. But in doing that, we showed new ways of working that were really paramount to the DoD changing course in the way that it thought about software. It wasn't perfect. We screwed up a ton of things, as a lot of the folks on the line could attest because they were in the rooms. But those new ways of working were brought to us by companies like yours. We didn't know. The greatest thing about maybe the DoD and the military is we tend to be a self-aware bunch, right? And borderline cynical. But the start of Kessel Run, we knew what we didn't know. We know we needed help, so we went out and got it from companies who have done this for a living that resemble companies in the DSC. So we didn't go to the normal defense primes and ask them how to do this in the right way. We tried to find companies from outside of that normal incentive structure to help us, find new ways of thinking and that sort of thing. We weren't tied to and have incentives baked in the old legacy ways of working. Kessel Run was, regardless of what happens in the future, I think a great success in that it showed that new ways of working are possible within the DoD. So with that, in going through that experience, there were a number of companies that we worked with that were incredible partners that we feel really lucky to have partnered with. There were also a lot of scenarios where there were companies we wanted to partner with who we couldn't and who wouldn't work with us for a number of reasons. And that led to, learning about some trepidation about companies working with the military and with the DoD, with the Air Force. So I tried to think and reflect back the last couple of days into what I think those things were and how could I share anything with this group that might help navigate some of those feelings if you still have them or if your company has them. So the first here, I think the one that is maybe a little bit obvious is mission complexity. And one of the challenges the DoD has is like a very unique mission, obviously, but it's also a unique language that comes along with it. It can be really hard to enter a military meeting when you're from the outside and even try to keep up. And I think that's it's purposeful gatekeeping in a lot of cases, unfortunately, by folks who are in those communities. But it can be really hard for new people to kind of crack that code and understand how to connect with folks in the military who have shared experiences, where usually those experiences are usually traumatic in some cases, or at least really helped shape those people themselves. So it's hard to kind of crack into that. And the difference here from a DoD perspective is that everyone here is a customer of the government in some form, right? So I think it might be a little bit easier to provide digital services to other parts of the government. Not easy, mind you, but maybe easier as you're able to kind of build empathy about some of those users, right? So you may not even know some problems exist. One of the first problems we solved at Kessel Run was helping plan and organize and operate in-air refueling, the complexity around that. Most of you probably never even thought about in-air refueling and how complex it is to plan those things, but all of you know how the struggle of submitting a tax return as an example. And we can tie those things more easily with our kind of mental models about how that can affect change positively to constituents and people who utilize government services. So I think the DoD can be a little bit of a struggle there. So on the one hand, we're seeing some kind of changes happen here. One of them is that DoD members who largely, in some case, learned technical skills and product development from digital services companies are starting their own companies or organizations where now they come in with that DoD background already and throw on top of it some digital services skills. And we've seen that working because they can speak both languages. Then we've also seen the opposite, where do we want to bring in product people who have been doing this for the whole careers, then teach them the military side of things. It's the kind of age-old astronauts or drillers paradigm that we work with. And I think that the real trick here is you need both of those things. I think without new entrants into this kind of field, those old ways of working get further and further ingrained into kind of the workers who are in positions of decision-making authority. I think they need to hear new voices and ways of doing product delivery and digital cultures and that sort of thing. So I think the unique thing that you all can bring to the table from a DoD perspective is you have the tools to navigate this complexity, even if the language can be a little bit hard to navigate at first. So I think that's one of the challenges that we've seen within entry for this work. The second one I thought about is contracting complexity. This is one that is probably shared across all of government, but I think the DoD is notoriously hard to break into. for companies because it's so big and it's so hard to navigate who to talk to about what things. Even the things that we build to increase simplicity oftentimes do the opposite. So obviously breaking in is the hardest part. I always think of it if you compare it to when you're fresh out of college and you have all this energy and knowledge, you want to get into the workforce and all these entry level jobs are like, you need 3 years experience to provide value here. But you need a job to get the 3 years experience. So you're kind of in this rut of figuring that out. And that's often the challenge with getting into any government contracting, which it's particularly in government where certain companies have a stranglehold over a majority of the work due to relationships and history and those sort of things. So I think that is very tough. I recently, as John mentioned, started a new company myself, and it's the first time being on the other side of this and navigating the joys of, comparing hiring timelines to contract awards and payroll to invoicing and all of those things, the math that comes with that is something I wasn't looking forward to, but I've learned pretty quickly about it. And sometimes it feels easier to go, ask somebody for money instead. But navigating all the rules is certainly a challenge, requires patience and persistence. But I do think we're seeing a shift here. This is going to be a slow one, to be fair. But last year, the DoD awarded over $145 billion in federal contract dollars to small businesses, which is up 13 billion from that sounds like monopoly money, but up from the year before. So if you can find your niche in the defense space, the work is there and the opportunity is certainly there. You do need some stamina and probably some help to navigate the initial complexities, which is unfortunate. But programs like SBA and AFWorks, SBIRs, STTRs, DIU, there's a lot of activities, a lot of things happening to make this easier. Most of those opportunities are in kind of specific areas and help certain things. So finding partners to help you navigate that is valuable. And I would say that there are people on the line right now and within this community who have done a ton of this work and will willingly help you navigate some of those complexities, and they've helped others before, including myself. The TAM here is massive, right? The DoD is the world's largest employer, and the DoD budget's over $700 billion, and 75% of that goes to industry. That's a lot of money to be made, and a lot of opportunity if you can fight through that initial complexity and then hope over time that feedback leads to better services and better ability to kind of access some of that. And then the last one here, and this is maybe the most interesting, company culture and morality, or whatever, however you want to phrase that, however that means to you. A lot of the conversations that I've had in my time working with government and working with kind of more modern kind of digital services companies, a lot of the companies are like, look, we do government services, but we decided to not do defense work, or we decided to not be involved in this type of work, or for whatever reason within your company. That's great. I do want to try to add at least context as just from my experience, and you can take it for what it's worth. Again, the DoD is the world's largest bureaucracy. There's unlimited potential here for change management and digital transformation. And I think a lot of you kind of navigate that space. And the idea of being the world's largest employer, the vast majority of the DoD are made up of regular humans with families who deserve an easier way to work, right? Most of these people are not doing anything directly related to, targeting things, dropping bombs, what have you, right? The majority of it is regular tasks that need to happen in large enterprises. Now, we're not naive here. All those jobs exist in order to support the US defense interests, and they should, and that's great. But in between all of that are a lot of regular people who have to deal with some ridiculous, software and processes that could use help along the way. Not to mention the DoD's massive humanitarian mission that we've seen mobilized, particularly in the last couple of years. So I would say that from my perspective, I'm not here to tell you how to run your company, but my perspective that I've utilized is regardless of whether you decide to work with the Air Force, the DoD, the work is going to happen. I tell myself I'd rather it be me ensuring that I'm doing some of those things with integrity and quality. And I hope to see more companies like those tackle some of those large problems as well. I just want to also, before I close here, identify some of the really interesting projects and things that I've come across the last couple of years that have showed where digital service companies can have real impact within the DoD outside of the things you hear about every day, directly related to war fighting, if you will. So the first one here, in 2021, in the midst of a massive Afghan refugee crisis, Kessel Run actually rescoped completely one of their command and control products that was initially intended to help bases react if there was an emergency, including an attack. That got rescoped rapidly to help with evacuating refugees from the various camps around Afghanistan. And this is something that wouldn't have been possible if we had the previous work hadn't already been done. There were numerous kind of industry partners involved in creating that product. It was a huge win to see the software we were building repurposed for this sort of purpose, where you can see the direct need and value being delivered. That was really cool. The second one here is also really neat, and this is actually led by a DSE company themselves, a project called GearFit. And this was a project born out of the Air Force that where they recognized a need for women to get the proper military clothing, uniforms, equipment. They weren't fitting their bodies right because they had unisex everything. And so we built a product, or they built a product that allowed women in the Air Force to request specific needs for their gear, and doing it in a digital way to rapidly execute that need, which was really, really cool to see, and kind of a unique way to see where digital services could help in a very tangible way. Another cool one is the Defense Health Agency's threat blood management tool. One of the problems that was had here is that these swaths of people would be deployed overseas, and then they lose connectivity to their various networks and to the internet. So we lose data about the blood of those various service members, which you can imagine is very important when emergencies happen and that sort of thing. So the Defense Health Agency built a tool that allowed it to help share information on blood types, transfusions, previous donations, and other data, so that when units are disconnected, they have no access to networks, they'd have that information. So in a split second, should an emergency happen, they can make smart decisions and save people's lives. So that was a really cool one as well, again, with support from industry for sure. Digital University is another one supported by DSE companies. This was an opportunity for the Air Force to leverage commercially available learning software and make it available to everybody in the Air Force at scale super quickly. They were able to put this out really quickly. So all service members got access to e-learning material for upskilling themselves in various digital areas, including software engineering. And then lastly here, a variety of companies on the line and others have worked directly with Air Force and government personnel, just in one-on-one coaching, training, pairing, in order to just build the digital competency and literacy of the folks within the government itself, to help them do things like this at greater scale. And again, nobody's naive here. A lot of that work goes into other places as well, but I think that's up to each company to decide what they're comfortable with. So with that, that's what I had prepared for this conversation, and happy to take any kind of thoughts or questions from the group. So I guess I'll turn it back over to you, John.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. I really do appreciate it. Everything that you said was so spot on, and I think some of the questions that follow are going to build upon what you said. The one thing that I will say, just to have my own testament about working with the military, right? Fearless has been able to build a whole line of business with the Air Force, and we have not done anything on the offensive side of things, right? So it is possible, as Adam said, where majority of the work that at least the Air Force is doing, I would say probably the whole military is doing, is not in that offensive space, right? So it is certainly possible if that is a true concern in how you're making that decision in that realm, as a business owner. So, but that said, we have questions. And the first question that I have is, over the years at Kessel, right, and maybe extend that to maybe larger military, Air Force in general, right? Have you seen an overall culture shift across the organization? And if you could just point out or tell a few stories in that regard, that'd be awesome.
Yes,
good and bad.
Yeah. I think shift is an interesting word. There have definitely been changes that have happened as a result, not just Kessel Run, but even before us, 18F, DDS, USD, a lot of organizations that deserve a lot of credit. I think we've definitely seen changes or a shift in the language that's utilized. I'm not convinced that we've seen like a real culture shift that has changed the way that we actually work necessarily. I think we're in the midst of it, but if I'm being honest, I've been a bit disappointed in the DoD's ability to take advantage of momentum that was created a few years ago by a number of teams and companies. So I think we're using language that people see, but it's a lot of cargo culting and a lot of like pattern matching in places that maybe aren't as deep as I wish they would be. So I'm disappointed in that way, but I mean, I think we certainly started to see a shift in some areas. Maybe I'm being a little bit cynical too, but there's been policy shifts and things like that. I just choose to wait to see when policies lead to changes in reality to pop the champagne generally.
Got it.
One thing, real quick, one thing I would add here is I think we've yet to really find the methods and tools to like help this transformation with horizontal scale. Like I think if you look at certain pockets where some of your companies have invested in specific teams and like one-on-one pairing and coaching and all that, I think it's like individual transformations has happened all over the place, right? Which I think is valuable, and maybe I shouldn't downplay. But those things with the size of government, size of DoD, I don't know that you can take one-on-one coaching and pairing and those types of things and scale them horizontally. So how do we find the things that allow us to use mitosis to grow more or find that scale? I think that's maybe the challenge we need to figure out.
Yeah, I appreciate that last point, because it was actually going to lead me to like the next question or set of questions, right? Which is like, what lessons learned or best practices would you recommend that other government agencies adopt that CUSL or the Air Force have really been akin to? And I can only assume that like where you think those lessons learned probably are some of the gaps you're trying to fill within your own company. So maybe merge those two thoughts together. So.
Sure. My brain instantly goes to leadership development in the digital paradigm. I think that there's so much talent and just bright people who want to work in more effective ways everywhere around government, that I don't think finding those people and giving them the tools and the skills they need is actually it's difficult. So is as hard as finding leaders to cultivate that and support it in the proper ways. And I think where we've seen success in people leading these efforts on the government side are people who started and did the work first and kind of like grew with organizations. And this is a bias that I have, because that's what I did, but I felt way more effective and prepared to be a leader of an organization after going through all of that work up front, to know what it felt like to be within a product team and working with users, and then know what it felt like to lead two teams. I felt more and more prepared. And I think the people who you've seen be successful put in that work at a various industry, government organizations who have been successful. The problem we have generally is that works for a certain amount of time, and then the bureaucracy kind of seeps in. And now we're just kind of like having people come and take over organizations who haven't done the work to build that mindset, that growth mindset, that willingness to learn and adapt. So now you have this weird thing where like this culture just started to be created, but now we have this leader who's maybe in a different place. And it leads us to really diluting the momentum, I think, that we've seen going forward. As far as lessons learned go, I think it's important to provide real investment into your staff, and it's more important to just get out of their way afterwards. And I think largely what I've seen is a lot of career government people actually, maybe it's not even in government, but that first step from individual contributor to team leader or first line leader, people have a hard time knowing what to do with their time, right? And they used to be do work, the project manager, they're making decisions. It's really hard to remove yourself from that and realize like, my entire job here is to set these people up for success and make sure that they can do their jobs and they have the resources and tools and top cover and all of those things. And that's really hard because it's super ambiguous, and you just find yourself like sitting around with looking at your calendar like, what do I do? I used to be effective. Now I'm not effective. So I got to go like find work to do. And I think that type of coaching just not existent in the DoD in my experience so far. I think that's where we see a lot of the challenges, is in that kind of first tier generally.
Yeah, just the general idea of just capacity building in government, right? It's just like it's something that government, and somewhat industry doesn't do well, right? So totally understand.
Yeah, and then I think too, in that kind of learning and development space, which is where our company will be focused. We're not like ready to kind of launch things just yet, but it'll definitely be in that space. And I think the one thing that we've certainly seen and learned is that power dynamics have just shifted, particularly in tech, right? Where it used to be that learning and growth was controlled by the formal foundational structures that existed, be it your university or the job that you did, right? Traditionally, you learned what your company told you to learn, you worked your way up the ladder. Now it's flipped, where like employees have the power. Everybody can go get jobs in the tech industry at the very least, and they can get jobs where they want to. Now it's up to companies to like invest in their people in the right way in order to engage with them properly and keep them around. So now you like that power dynamic has led to like, how do you take advantage of the democratization of learning content and information that exists throughout the internet in a proper way? And so I think like that's things that are interesting to me right now, is that the inherent way the government works is hierarchical. It's top down. It's making decisions in a small group and making sure that they work for lowest common denominators. And that just doesn't work in a digital native world anymore. And the employees aren't going to take it, and they're all going to leave and go work for companies who want to invest in them. So I think there's the government needs to be prepared for that shift. And we're already starting to see it, to be honest.
Yeah, cool. I think so we have about 15 minutes left, or a little bit less, and so like I want to go down two paths, right? I want to go down a path around what it takes to like break in and do work with the Air Force or Kessel, right? So I want to create space for that, but I also want to talk about or ask you questions around like for those companies that will enter or are doing work today, like what are those big barriers, big things that like really prohibit good work happening? And for Fearless, I could say like one thing that was a major thing that we had to do first starting off with the DoD was this idea of like actually doing human-centered design, right? Having design services. And I don't know, can you talk about like unlocking that as the fulcrum to like do bigger things with the DoD?
Yeah, I would say that was maybe the biggest challenge for us. I don't even think it's solved, and we're 5 years in. But the idea of user-centered design, again, is just antithetical to the structure and system that the DoD just is and the people live within. There's an entire, cottage industry of people who manage requirements in the DoD, right? You have like people who were colonels for 20 years, and now they've been civilians for 15 more managing requirements. Like those people are going to work really hard to make sure that like they can keep managing requirements until they meet the requisite time to get their retirement pay or whatever, right? And that like it doesn't work when you have again the incentives laid out in a way that user-centered design is against the incentives that are inherent. There aren't bad people. Nobody wants to do a worse job or make things not go well. They just have been grown and learned a way of working that doesn't work in a modern world anymore. So I think lessons learned for sure is that I would have taken a more hand-holding or partnered approach in tackling this in retrospect. I think early on when I was first getting started, I was going as hard as possible. Like, look, here's the reality of the world. You guys are behind, blah, blah. And like, first thing we did, like they that cut them off and they weren't willing to listen to me anymore, right? So all of a sudden I'm doing these kind of conversations. I could tell it's like Charlie Brown teacher to these stakeholders who I'm trying to like convince to work in a new way. In retrospect, I would have spent a lot more time allowing them to be invested in the same way that I was getting invested in, right? By being able to learn with me and understand why these things are new. Like nobody wants to, sit in a room and get told for 30 minutes that what they're doing is wrong. They go back to their offices right after that. So I think that's one thing that I did very poorly, and I'm trying to get better at now, though still struggling in some ways. So I think from a design perspective, where we've seen it be really effective is when teams have space to operate on their own, and you have a team who is who understands they don't know the answers already, right? So if you remove some of the subject matter expertise folks from a little bit removed from the team, we've seen that be successful where there's like a bunch of ambiguity, and you let people use their design skills and UCD skills to go like figure out the right, thing to experiment with and that sort of thing. We've definitely seen it work. It's effective. It just, we've yet to see how that fits into the larger structure of the DoD for between policy and resources and that sort of thing. I don't think that we're there yet, and we won't be while the JSIDs or the requirements process exists and all of those things. So yeah, I think we've seen some of that work, just again, not at scale yet.
You have any other thoughts around, folks, people trying to break in and do work with the Air Force or with Kessel in particular? Any advice?
Yeah, I think the thing that I would think about is, again, the psychology of humans and their own internal incentive structures, which they won't tell you and maybe not even be able to identify directly, right? And one of the things is government teams, in my experience, don't want to hire you to come in and be the hero that saves the day. They want to be the hero that saves the day. So how can you position yourself as the support behind them, like providing them the tools and services, making them sound really smart and giving them the tools to be successful? I think that's unfortunate, but I think that's a reality of a lot of these organizations. And then again, the other thing is this industry is still based on relationship building and networking in a lot of ways. So if you're a company who's looking to break into the DoD and hasn't before, I would take advantage of the other folks on this line who have and utilize them where possible and do the work in building the relationships to that you need. So I would tell you that on the government side, I've been through a number of like source selections and things like that. And like after the 20th proposal of somebody who like really knows Agile and there's a DevOps loop and all that, it's really hard to differentiate yourself in this space from a proposal perspective. You got to do the work up front where possible and feasible and legal and all of that. But I think it's hard to just kind of jump in cold, I guess.
Cool. And we'll probably take one more question, if that's okay, Ken, and we'll wrap up maybe 5 minutes early to give people time to transition. But it's a Pandora's box kind of question, right? So talent, right? I know some of the stories around, trying to acquire talent. I've heard some of the stories up in Kessel about how hard it was to acquire talent and how critical it was to getting to mission success. What are your thoughts on how the talent market is going? How the Air Force views talent? Is it we're okay with the younger talent and growing them up, or really focus on the super senior folks, or just your general views on talent in general would be awesome.
I think it's probably close to an existential crisis in a lot of ways, like digital talent in the military in particular. My dog's going to go nuts for like 2 minutes, so I'm sorry if you can hear that. But I would say that the challenge that we have is we spend all this investment in time in building usually like junior CG or captains and junior officers and enlisted folks in how to work in this way. And those people are perfect because they're like bought in. They just want to learn new things and they're sponges and like it's one of the benefits of the military. And then they do this great work. Almost all of the efforts that about in the DoD, from Kessel Run to Platform One to all of them, almost all of them started by captains or lower. It's very rare that any of these organizations were started by somebody who is senior. And that comes from the creativity, energy, and all of that. The problem becomes the assignment system and the structure, again, isn't really set up for those people to go be able to do and work in this modern way again. So all of them are getting out in order to, not because they want to leave the military. And people will tell you it's because they can get paid more in industry. I can tell you that that's not true. the compensation is not the reason people are leaving. It's they are afraid to go back to working in an old way. And that's why they're leaving. Which leads to a bigger problem in that we can't actually grow these higher level leaders because they're all getting out beforehand. So we can never kind of get ahead of this cycle of building the structure needed from a talent perspective going forward. So as much as I would love the government to be able to solve this problem on their own and build enough digital talent to be able to build all the things we need to build and do all that work, it's not going to happen. They can probably get some help there, but it's going to be up to industry to come in and provide the support needed, particularly in the highly technical and highly senior kind of roles. I think that you'll be able to build really strong middle level talent in the government, but at the senior level, that's going to come from industry. And I don't think it's going to come from your traditional primes.
I guess the mailman walked by, huh? Hi there, Adam.
My wife left is what happened, I think.
I got it. So our executive director has directed me to open the floor to questions. So that's what we're going to do. So we're not leaving 5 minutes early. We're going to do what she tells me to do, which is open the floor to questions. So anybody has a question, come off mute.
I'll start with, what kind of dog do you have?
Oh, she's a COVID rescue mutt who is doesn't know about how to deal with people. It's a real challenge. So bad time to ask me. Sorry.
So I got a question, Adam. So Felix over here at Excel. So I got to kind of experience you behind the scenes on the Kessel Run side. So now that you've transitioned, like, it sounds like you're not ready to let it all out the bag, but what's the game plan with your company, or how soon can we expect to see you out there impacting the world again?
Yeah, I appreciate it. So I do have a consulting company that I started who I'm working with right now. So feel free to connect on any of that stuff. Working on in the product space, focusing on how to solve the problem I mentioned earlier of using technology to leverage available learning content and match that with specific user journeys to help with organizational growth at scale. Lot to do, a lot of experiments in place. We'll keep you posted on how it goes.
Any other questions?
What would be one thing I think from your perspective of looking at the industry and stuff is, what do you wish that industry would do more of? Where you see the challenges that are coming from the government, where you're like, man, I just wish industry would do this to push these things internally, or if they only did X, what would you see? What was successful, and what would you like industry to see us do more of, so that we can kind of dive into those kinds of things, as opposed to always kind of trying to fight against the challenges. But what are things that you think we should use our influence, or things that we've been successful in making the change on?
Yeah, that's a good question. And there are probably some folks who have lived like acquisitions life who have a different or better answer than me. But I would say the majority of challenges, especially seeing it on this side now, is not your fault and isn't a response to things. But I would say the things that I'd love to see more on are feedback being provided to government acquisition leaders on RFIs and proposals that are put out and things like that. So they can start hearing it more and more. Because I'll tell you that what's happening right now is government people are getting feedback from people they have relationships with. I think it would be really valuable if they started getting that more and more. I know it's work and like people, it feels like it won't go anywhere. But I think the acquisitions community needs more direct feedback from industry in a lot of ways. The other thing is maybe finding places that maybe the DSC is a good example of it, of sharing across companies more. And I think where we've seen companies have like partnerships and coalitions, they've all been more effective, right? And I think sometimes it's hard to know when it's good to partner or to what's proprietary, and all those things are things you got to figure out. But I think that we've seen that there's enough money to go around, enough work to be had, but I think that we've seen collaboration be more effective so that we can solve problems once and share best practices. And I'll tell you, the companies on the line have been really great about that with me and other companies. So I would say keep that part of it up.
Cool. Well, it feels like a good place to stop, Ken. I'll turn it back over to you to close us out. Oh, wait, someone had a hand up? No.
Oh,
All right, you good.
people are, yeah, feel free to post your contact information in the chat, as well as like, so that, we can do some networking. I'll make sure that gets sent out. Thanks, Adam, for posting your contact information as well. I really want to thank both Adam and John for a great session today, and for being pretty brutally honest, which is what we like to hear. It helps all of our companies as we look to kind of move forward in this digital transformation space or whatever. Thanks everyone for joining in. Exciting webinar series with the DSC, and I'll get more information out for the April event.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
Adam. Thanks, Ken. Thanks, John.
All right.